"You are dismissed," said the Duke of Nethercote, and 14 people at his dinner table went perfectly silent. He heard the words leave his mouth and knew, in the same half-second, that he had chosen them badly. But a duke does not amend a sentence in front of 14 guests, and so Ambrose Hale reached for his glass and let them stand. At the far end of the table, Miss Susanna Lark rose from her chair. She did not flush. She did not glance at anyone. She folded her napkin, laid it beside her plate, and made him a curtsy of exactly the depth the occasion required, which was the first thing about the whole evening that he would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. "Thank you for 3 years." And she went out, and Marchant shut the door behind her, and Lady Coroner Frail said brightly that the syllabub was a triumph. Nothing had happened. That was what Ambrose told himself for the next 3 hours, through the syllabub and the withdrawing and the whist and the carriages. Nothing whatever had happened. He had told his mother's companion that she might leave the room. If the words had come out with more edge than he intended, it was because the girl had put him in an intolerable position, and she was a sensible creature and would understand it by morning. And he would say something civil to her in the breakfast room, and that would be the end of it. He was, on the whole, more annoyed with the bishop. It had begun with the bishop. Somewhere between the turbot and the saddle of mutton, the Bishop of Nordham had laid down his fork and said that he had read His Grace's memorandum on the relief of the Sarnwick tenants 3 times, and that in 20 years of committee work he had never seen a document of the kind. The figures unanswerable, the tone free of cant, the recommendation on the winter fuel fund a stroke of plain human sense that had shamed half the house. "You are too good," said Ambrose. "I am nothing of the kind. There is a passage on page 9, Duke, the calculation of a family's coal against a laborer's day rate through a hard January, which I intend to quote from the pulpit. Where in heaven's name did you get such a figure?" And there had been a small pause into which, from the far end of the table, a low clear voice had said, "It is not quite right, my lord, as it stands. It should be a day and a half in a hard January, not a day. The Sarnwick coal comes 11 miles by cart, and the carriage is charged twice above Nether Bridge." Every head had turned. Ambrose had looked down the table at his mother's companion grey silk, no jewels, sitting where she always sat, between the dowager and the door, and had felt a thing go through him that he would not name at the time and could name perfectly well afterwards. It was not annoyance. It was exposure. Because Miss Lark was right. She was right because she had computed that figure. She had computed all of them. The memorandum on the relief of the Sarnwick tenants, which the Bishop of Nordham intended to quote from the pulpit, had been drafted across 11 evenings in the small library at Nethercote House by the Duke of Nethercote and his mother's paid companion, sitting on opposite sides of a table with the estate books between them, and rather more than half of what was good in it had come out of her side of the table. Nobody in that dining room knew it, and in the silence after she spoke, Ambrose Hale understood that they were all about to guess it. "How very well informed your mother's companion is, Duke," said Lady Coroner Frail, and laughed, and touched her pearls. "One is quite in awe. Do you have her check all your papers, or only the important ones?" There it was. And Ambrose, who had faced down a hostile committee of 19 and a mob at Bristol, and a father who had never once approved of him, discovered that he had no stomach whatever for being thought a man whose reports were written by a clergyman's daughter at £30 a year. So he had said coolly, "Miss Lark forgets herself." And then, because the silence went on a beat too long and he wanted it ended, "You may go, Miss Lark. In fact, you are dismissed." He had meant the room. He was almost certain afterwards that he had meant the room. But he had said it in the tone he used to a footman who had spilt something, and 14 people had heard it as what it plainly was, and one of them had been the woman herself. His mother did not speak to him that night. The Dowager Duchess of Nethercote, 78 and lame and perfectly clear in her mind, had watched the whole exchange from the head of the table, and when the last carriage had gone, she allowed her son to give her his arm to the foot of the stairs, and then took it back. "Mother." "Not tonight, Ambrose." It was a form of words. "Yes," said his mother, "it was." He slept badly and came down at 9, and the breakfast room was empty. That was not remarkable. Miss Lark breakfasted at 7:30, because his mother woke at 7 and would not have anybody else read to her. What was remarkable was that at 9:30 his mother's bell rang, and rang again, and Ambrose came out onto the landing to find the Dowager Duchess's maid in tears and Marchant standing in the middle of the hall with a letter in his hand, and an expression on his face that Ambrose had never seen on it in 20 years. "Miss Lark's room is empty, Your Grace." The room was on the second floor at the back, over the mews. He had never been in it. He went in that morning and stood in the doorway, and the smallness of it was the first blow. There was a bed, a press, a washstand, a chair, and a table under the window with nothing on it. She had stripped the bed and folded the linen at its foot. On the table in 3 neat piles were the things she was returning: the key to the small library, the key to the medicine cupboard, the Dowager's second spectacles, a black-bound book which proved to be a day-by-day record of his mother's health for 3 years, with the hours of her sleep and the doses of her drops, written up to and including the previous evening, and a sealed packet of £31 4 being, said the paper pinned to it, the wages of the quarter not yet earned, returned. Beside them lay her letter, addressed to the Dowager Duchess, and a second, much shorter, addressed to him. He read his standing up in the doorway of a room, the size of a horse-box. "Your Grace, the memorandum is quite sound apart from page 9, and the correction is in the margin of the fair copy in the second drawer. The Sarnwick Fuel Fund must be applied for before Lady Day, or it is lost for the year. Your mother's drops are to be reduced by 2 in a mild week, and never given after 9 at night, whatever she tells you. The tenant's book is made up to Michaelmas. I am very grateful for 3 years of kindness and of employment. I have taken nothing that is not mine. It has been the greatest privilege of my life to be of use in this house. Susanna Lark." Not a word of reproach, not one. He turned the paper over twice looking for it, and there was nothing there but coal and drops and gratitude, and Ambrose Hale stood in that bare little room with the sheet of paper shaking in his hand, and felt the floor of his life tilt. "When," he said. "6:30, Your Grace," said Marchant. "She would not have the carriage. She would not have Thomas carry her box. She walked out at the area door with it on her shoulder, and she thanked every one of us by name." "Where?" "She did not say. She was asked." Ambrose went up to his mother. The Dowager Duchess of Nethercote was sitting up against her pillows, with her companion's letter open on the counterpane, and she had been crying, which he had seen twice before, at his father's funeral and at his brother's. "Sit down," she said. "No, there where I can see you. Now, what did you imagine you were doing?" "I told her she might leave the room." "You told her she was dismissed, before the Bishop of Nordham and Corona Frail and 11 others, because she had made you look as if you needed her." His mother's voice was quite steady, and it went through him like a skewer. "You have been made to look, Ambrose, as if you needed a clergyman's daughter. What a calamity." "Mother, do you know what that girl does in this house?" She lifted the letter. "You do not, so you shall be told, and you shall sit there and hear the whole of it. She comes at 7 and reads to me for an hour because my eyes will not do it. She has kept the record of my health for 3 years in a book you have never seen, and it was she who told Dr. Bassett in April that the drops were too strong, and she was right, and he has said since that she very probably kept me out of my grave. She writes 40 letters a month for me. She has taught 2 of the housemaids to read. She found the error in Beaudelet's returns from the Nether Bridge carriage and brought it to you in November, to you, Ambrose, not to me, because she would not have the man disgraced until she had checked it 3 times. She has sat with me every night that I could not sleep, and there have been a great many, and she has never once let me see that she was tired. The dowager stopped and breathed. And she was paid £30 a year and a room over the Mews, and in 3 years I do not believe you have said 100 words to her that were not about business, and last night in front of your friends you spoke to her as you would not speak to a dog. Ambrose sat with his hands on his knees. She will come back, he said. Will she? She has nowhere to go. Her father is dead. There is no family, there is nothing but a cousin in Ipswich who did not want her. She has £31 she has just given back to me, and a box she carried on her shoulder. He heard his own voice rising and could not stop it. She has no situation and no character to show and know. She has a character, said his mother. It is written all over this house. Yours is the one that wants looking to. She turned her face away. Go and find her, Ambrose, and when you find her, understand what you are asking, because you have taught her in 1 sentence exactly what she is worth in this family, and she is a great deal cleverer than you are. He went down to the hall and stood in the middle of it, and for perhaps 30 seconds the Duke of Nethercote had no idea in the world what to do, which had not happened to him since he was 19. Then he began to give orders. By noon there were 4 Nethercote carriages out. By 3 there were 19. He had begun with his own. The town coach, the barouche, the chaise and the curricle, and his own 2 saddle horses, sent to the 4 registry offices for governesses and companions that Marchant could name, and to the coach offices at Charing Cross, the Bull and Mouth, the Swan with 2 necks, and the White Horse Cellar. By 1 o'clock, every one of them was back with nothing, and Ambrose Hale did a thing that was talked of in 3 clubs for a fortnight afterwards. He sent his secretary out with a purse to hire every vehicle he could lay hands on. 15 hackney coaches were engaged that afternoon by the Duke of Nethercote at a guinea a day, and stationed like pickets. 2 went east along the Essex Road, and 2 north up Bishopsgate. 1 took the Bath Road as far as Hounslow. 3 worked the shipping offices, because a woman with no family and no situation might do anything. 2 more went to the charity schools, 1 to the Foundling, 1 to the offices of the 4 principal newspapers, to place, in the morning editions, an advertisement composed and rewritten 11 times, in which a lady lately of a household in Grosvenor Square was requested, in terms of the deepest respect, to communicate with Messrs. Hollow and Pike, solicitors, where a matter greatly to her advantage waited, and no answer would be required of her but her direction. He went himself to Ipswich. 9 hours, changing horses twice, to Poulterer's house in a back street, where a hard-faced woman told him that she had not seen Susanna Lark since the funeral, that the family had done all that could be expected, and that if his Grace found her, he might tell her there was no room here. And Ambrose stood in that doorway and thought about a room over the Mews with the linen folded at the foot of the bed. He was back in London at 2 in the morning. He did not go to bed. He sat in the small library, on his side of the table, with the estate books open in front of him where they had lain for 11 evenings, and the fair copy of the memorandum in the second drawer with her correction in the margin, in a small upright hand. And for the first time in his adult life, the Duke of Nethercote put his head in his hands. He had a great deal of time in those 36 hours to be honest with himself. And being honest was not a thing he had ever practiced much. So it came at him in a rush, like water into a hold. He had known. That was the discovery. Not since last night, for 2 years. He had known perfectly well what she was, and had arranged his life so as to have the whole of the benefit and none of the cost of admitting it. He had begun going to the small library after his mother went up. He had told himself it was because the estate books were there. It was because she was there. He had come in at 10 with the Sarnwick returns and stayed until 1, and it had been the only 3 hours of his day in which nobody wanted anything from him and nobody was afraid of him. She contradicted him. She had contradicted him about the drainage of the low meadows, about the Bristol wool duties, about his own brother's memory, about the state of the Nether Bridge Road, and once about the character of a man he had known for 20 years, and she had been right on 4 occasions out of 5, and had never once made anything of it. He had brought her books, and pretended it was for his mother. He had begun to know when the door opened by the sound of it. He had, in April, taken the Sarnwick figures out into the garden at midnight, and stood in the wet grass and been perfectly happy, and had not asked himself why. And in 3 years, he had never once said her name in company. He had never taken her arm. He had never asked her whether the room over the mews was cold, and it was cold. He had put his hand on the wall of it that morning and found it damp. And when Coroner Frail laughed at his dinner table, he had thrown her out of the room to save his own credit. Nobody had done this to him. There was no villain in it, no scheme, no enemy. He had done it himself, out of a pride so habitual he had never once looked at it, and the whole of it fitted in 11 words spoken between the mutton and the syllabub. At 4 in the morning, Marchant came in without knocking, which he had never done. "Your Grace, the bell and mitre in Aldersgate. The Kelmslay coach goes at 6, and the bookkeeper says a lady of that name, and that description has an inside seat paid for 2 days ago, in the name Lark." Ambrose was on his feet, 2 days ago. 2 days ago, Your Grace. 2 days before the dinner, before the bishop, before Coroner Frail, before the 11 words. She had taken the seat 2 days before he opened his mouth. He was in Aldersgate in 20 minutes, with the horses steaming. The yard of the Bell and Mitre at 4:30 on a March morning was lamplight and wet cobbles and the smell of harness. She was sitting in the corner of the coffee room on a hard settle with her box at her feet and her hands in her lap. In the same gray traveling cloak she had worn to church every Sunday for 3 years, and there was a cup of tea in front of her that she had not touched. She stood up when he came in. Of course she stood up. 3 years of standing up. "Your Grace." "Sit down," said Ambrose. "Please. Miss Lark Susanna, sit down. For the love of heaven, you have been sitting in a coach office all night." She sat. He did not. He had come 9 hours to Ipswich and back, and had rehearsed 11 speeches on the way, and every one of them went out of his head at the sight of her face, which was very tired and entirely composed. "You took the seat 2 days ago," he said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I gave your mother my notice a fortnight since," said Susanna Lark, "and she asked me to say nothing to you until the quarter, and I agreed. I have taken a place as the mistress of the school at Kelmslay in the North Riding. It is £30 a year and a cottage, and the trustees have engaged me on Dr. Bassett's character and the vicar of Sarnwick's." Ambrose Hale sat down after all, on a settle in a coach office, because his legs required it. "You were leaving anyway." "Yes." "Then what I said at that table." "What you said at that table," she said, "made no difference to the coach, and a great deal of difference to me. And I would rather you did not ask me about it in a public room." There was a silence. Somewhere in the yard, a horse was being backed into the shafts. "Why were you going?" he said. She looked at her hands. "Your Grace, this will do neither of us any good." "I have hired 15 hackney coaches," said Ambrose. "I have had men at every shipping office in the Pool of London, and an advertisement standing in 4 newspapers, and I have been to Ipswich and seen your cousin, who told me there was no room. I have had 2 days in which to learn things about my own house that my mother had to tell me out of her bed. You may say anything to me you like, and I will hear it, and I will not answer back. Why were you going?" Susanna Lark lifted her head, and there was color in her face at last. "Because of the evenings in the small library," she said. Ambrose did not move. "For 18 months, she said. "You have come down at 10 o'clock, and we have worked at that table until 1, and you have argued with me as though I were a person whose opinion could alter something, and you have brought me books and said they were for your mother, and I have gone up those stairs at 1 in the morning happier than I have any business to be at £30 a year." Her voice was low and very steady, and it did not spare either of them. "And in the daytime I was Miss Lark, who sits by the door." Both of those were true, and I could bear either of them, and I found that I could not bear the 2 together. So in February I wrote to the Kelmslay trustees, because I am 25, and I have no family and no fortune, and the only thing I own outright is my own good sense, and I could see exactly what was going to become of me if I stayed in that house another 5 years. Susanna. "And then on Tuesday, at your table, in front of your friends and the woman everybody in your household expects you to marry, you told me I forgot myself and dismissed me like a footman who had spilt the wine." She stopped and swallowed and went on. "And I want you to understand that I am grateful, Your Grace, because in 11 words you settled a question I had been 18 months failing to settle, and you saved me from spending the next year of my life wondering." The Duke of Nethercote sat on that hard settle in the lamplight and took it in full, and found that he had nothing whatever to say in his own defense. "Come back," he said, "not to the post, to the house. I will." "No." "Susanna." "No, Your Grace." She stood and picked up her gloves. "Because there is no version of my coming back this morning that does not end with the whole of Grosvenor Square knowing that the companion made a scene and was fetched home in a carriage. And because whatever you are about to offer me, you are offering it at 5:30 in the morning after 2 days without sleep, and I have read enough to know what a man says in a coach office and what he thinks by Michaelmas. That is not just." "It is not unjust either," said Susanna Lark, "and you know it, and if you were on the other side of that library table you would tell me so yourself." The bookkeeper put his head in at the door and called the Kelmslay coach. She picked up her box. Ambrose took it out of her hand without a word and carried it out into the yard and put it up to the guard himself and stood in the wet at the step while she got in. "Kelmslay," he said, "in the North Riding." "The school is beside the church," said Susanna from inside the coach. "Your Grace, the fuel fund, before Lady Day." "Before Lady Day." "And her drops, never after 9, whatever she tells you." "Never after 9." The guard shut the door. The coach came round in the yard and out under the arch, and Ambrose Hale stood in the middle of the Bell and Mitre in Aldersgate at 6 o'clock in the morning and let it go, which was the single hardest thing he had ever done, and he came to understand later, the first decent thing he had done in the whole affair. The Sarnwick Fuel Fund was applied for on the 11th of March, 13 days before Lady Day, by a duke who rode to the county town himself rather than trust it to a clerk. That was the small thing. The large thing he did on the 22nd, and it cost him more than the fund. He gave a dinner in Grosvenor Square, and he asked to it the same 14 people, everyone, including the Bishop of Nordham and Lady Corona Frail. And when the cloth was drawn, he stood up at the head of his own table and said that he had a correction to make to a conversation held in that room 3 weeks before. On the 9th of this month, said the Duke of Nethercote, the bishop was good enough to praise a memorandum of mine on the relief of the Sarnwick tenants, and to ask particularly about a calculation on page 9. My mother's companion, Miss Susanna Lark, told him from the end of this table that the figure was wrong. She was correct. She was correct because she made the calculation. She made most of them. That memorandum was written across 11 evenings by 2 people at one table, and I let it go out under one name, which was mine, and when Miss Lark was so ill-advised as to be accurate in public, I told her that she forgot herself and dismissed her from the room in the hearing of you all. He looked down the table at the empty chair by the door, which he had set as usual, and which he intended to have set for as long as it took. I was ashamed to be thought a man who needed a clergyman's daughter. I was not ashamed of needing her, mark you, only of being thought to. That is a distinction I recommend to nobody. She left this house at 6:30 the following morning with her box on her shoulder, and she is now the mistress of a village school in the North Riding at £30 a year, and there is not one person in this room, myself first, who has any excuse for it. The silence was of a quality he had never produced before, in the house or anywhere else. A second printing of the memorandum goes out next month, he said, with both names on the title page and hers first, since the arithmetic is hers. And I should be obliged, all of you, if in whatever account of this you give elsewhere, and you will give one, you would be accurate about which of us was in the wrong. That is all. The port is by you, Bishop. The Bishop of Nordham said, Duke, I have sat under a great many sermons and preached a good many, and I have not often heard the article of repentance done properly. Your health. Lady Corona Frail spoke to him in the hall afterwards, with her cloak over her arm, and Ambrose gave her the truth as well, because she was owed it, and because he had done with managing people. You have made me look absurd tonight, she said. No, I did that to myself, and you happened to be present, and I am sorry for it. He handed her her fan. You have been very generally spoken of as the next Duchess of Nethercote, and I have allowed it for 2 years because it was convenient, and because I never troubled to think about my own life. That was cowardice, and you have had 2 years of it from me. It ends tonight, and I have written to your father this afternoon so that it ends in the proper quarter, and not in gossip. Corona Frail looked at him for a moment. She corrected you in front of a bishop, she said. She has corrected me in front of a bishop, a magistrate, my steward, my mother, and my brother's memory, and she has been right nearly every time. Well, said Lady Corona, and for a moment there was something in her face that was almost respect. Then I hope she is a great deal braver than I am, Duke, because you will be an appalling amount of work. He wrote to Kelmslay once a week from the end of March, and made himself 3 rules and kept them. He sent no money, he sent no gifts, he did not once ask her to come back. He wrote about the fuel fund, and about the Nether Bridge carriage, and about Bildly's returns, and about his mother's drops, which were reduced by 2 in a mild week and never given after 9, whatever she said. He wrote about the second printing, and about a bill on the winter relief that he had begun to nurse through committee, and that took him 5 months and cost him 2 friendships. He wrote, once, about a room over the mews that he had opened out and made into a proper bedchamber with a chimney that drew, for whoever should have it next. She answered about slates. The Kelmslay school roof let water at the West End. There were 41 scholars on the books and 26 who came. The trustees had allowed her 9 shillings for coal for the whole of a Yorkshire winter, and she had told them what she thought of it. Her letters were short and dry and full of figures, and he read every one of them 4 times. In May she wrote, "The trustees have had an offer from a gentleman in the South to endow this school with 200 a year. I have declined it on their behalf. I am aware, Your Grace, that Messrs. Hollow and Pike are your solicitors. Do not do it again." He did not do it again. He endowed 6 other schools instead in 6 other counties, and told nobody, and never mentioned it in a letter. And he learned in November that she had found out about it anyway, from the bishop, and had cried, which he learned from his mother, who had no business telling him. Because his mother went north in June. The Dowager Duchess of Nethercote, 78 and lame, traveled 210 miles by easy stages in her own coach with 2 maids and a doctor's leave, to a cottage beside a church in the North Riding, and stayed a fortnight at the inn at Kelmslay, and sat every afternoon in the schoolroom in her good bonnet hearing the little ones read. "You are not to come," she wrote to him. "You are not invited, and neither is your carriage. I am going to see my friend, who kept me out of my grave, and I have not had a friend since 1804, and I am too old to be used as anybody's messenger. If you wish to say something to her, you may go and say it yourself, and you may do it on your own 2 feet like a man, and not send 19 coaches." He went in August, when the school was shut for the harvest, and he went, in fact, mostly on his own 2 feet, post as far as Thirsk, and then he walked the last 9 miles across the moor with his coat over his arm because the day was hot, and because he had begun to want to arrive at that place, having earned the last of the road. The school at Kelmslay was a long, low stone building beside the churchyard, with a new slated roof at the west end, and Miss Susanna Lark was on a ladder against the porch, with a bucket of limewash and her sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her hair coming down. She saw him at the gate and stopped, with the brush in her hand. "Your Grace." "Miss Lark," he put his hat on the wall, "your roof is mended." "The trustees found the money," she said, "after the Bishop of Nordham wrote them a letter which I am told was a masterpiece of the epistolary art, and which I did not ask for, and which cost you nothing but a dinner and an apology, so I have let it stand. Come down. I am in the middle of a wall." "Susanna," he came up the path, "come down, or I shall say it to a ladder, and I have practiced it too long to waste it on the joinery." She came down. She wiped her hands on her apron, which he thought was the finest gesture he had ever seen a woman make, and stood in front of him in the August light with limewash on her wrist. "In March," said Ambrose Hale, "you told me 2 things. You told me you could bear being Miss Lark by the door, and you could bear the woman at that table at 1 in the morning, and you could not bear the 2 together. And you told me that whatever I offered you in a coach office at 5:30 would look very different by Michaelmas." He took a breath. "It is the 14th of August. It is 5 months. It is the 2nd Michaelmas since I began coming down to that library at 10 o'clock, and pretending it was about the estate books. So here is the offer, made standing up in daylight, sober, on my own feet, 9 miles from the nearest carriage. Your Grace." "Marry me," he said. She had gone very white. "I'm not offering you a post," said Ambrose. "There is no post. My mother's companion may be some worthy woman we shall engage together and pay properly, and she will have the room with the chimney that draws. I am offering you the other side of the table, and the name that goes in front of mine in the second printing, and everything else that goes with it, most of which you will find tiresome, and some of which you will be able to alter, and I should be obliged if you would alter a great deal. And I am aware of what I did in that dining room, and I know that this is the man who did it, standing here asking you, and I have nothing to say about it except that it will not happen again, because I have found out what it costs, and I am not able to pay it twice." Susanna Lark set the brush down on the top of the wall, very carefully. Say the last part again, she said. Which part? The part about the other side of the table. I am offering you the other side of the table, said the Duke of Nethercote, for the rest of my life, and I would rather argue with you about the Low Meadows than agree with anybody else in England about anything. She began to cry and to laugh, and to be extremely angry about crying, and she said, You walked 9 miles. I walked 9 miles. Over the moor in August, in that coat. The coat is over my arm and my boots are ruined, and I have never been so glad of anything, said Ambrose. And then, because she had put both hands over her face, he said, in a voice not much above a whisper, Susanna. Is it yes? It was yes at the bell and mitre, she said, from behind her hands. And I got into the coach anyway, and I have thought about it every single day since, and it was still right. It was still right, he agreed. You would have been fetched home in a carriage and been the companion who made a scene. Now you are the woman who wrote page 9 and mended a roof. Then yes, said Susanna Lark. Yes, and you may tell your mother who has known since June, and who told me you would come in July and was very cross about being wrong. They were married in the church at Kelmslay at the end of September, with the school shut for the day and 41 scholars on the books and 41 of them present, and the trustees, and the Bishop of Nordham, who insisted, and the Dowager Duchess of Nethercote sat in the front pew and wept without the least attempt at concealment, and said afterwards that it was the only wedding she had ever attended that was about anything. The Duchess of Nethercote trained up her successor at the school and left it with an endowment that was not her husband's, having made £200 of her own by the second printing and a pamphlet on winter relief that ran to 4 editions with her name first on the title page. She was, within 5 years, the most quoted woman on the subject of coal in England, and she was never once at a table in London where anybody made the mistake of calling her well informed in that particular tone. And at Nethercote House, the small library was altered in only one respect. The table by the window kept its 2 chairs, and the estate book stayed on it, and at 10 o'clock at night, most nights, for a great many years, the Duke of Nethercote came down and sat on his side of it, and argued with his wife about the Nether Bridge carriage until 1 in the morning. Once early on, she looked up at him over the Sarnwick returns with her pen in her hand and said, It is 1 o'clock, your grace. You are dismissed. Am I? Said Ambrose Hale. You are, her mouth curved, and I shall be very much obliged if you will not go. He did not go, he never did.